Hi honeys! Today we are talking about rolled bag handles and specifically ones for lightweight fabrics that fray. These fabrics can be really tricky to work with when you're trying to do a more structured look and they need a lot of stabilization. So I went on a journey of trying to make some myself, and let me tell you, it wasn't as easy as I thought. It took me quite a few tries. And I also searched the whole internet for every tutorial I could find, and I couldn't find one that felt like intuitive and simple. And then I tried another couple that seemed like they might work, and there was like raw edges on the insides of these ones. So you'd think that that would be hidden against the bag. And after I watched this tutorial, I thought that looks great. But actually, if my bag handle folds down just above the stitching, there's an area here where you can see raw fabric and even the bag foam. And honestly, I just felt like it looked really sloppy. And I didn't like how wide the attachment was on the bag compared to the thickness of the actual handle. So I narrowed that as well. This method is foolproof. I promise you can do it. It's totally beginner friendly, even though there's a few little tricky steps when you're turning it the right side out. But if anything feels confusing or you just want to double check a step, just drop a comment below and I will get right back to you. So this is the construction method that I'm going to use in this tutorial. And as you can see, I've really narrowed the attachment section here so that it visibly looks the same width all the way up the handle. And I feel like it makes the bag look really elevated. And in this tutorial, we do actually stuff the handles. And I just thought I would show you what it looks like when it's not stuffed. So as you bend the handle, it sort of like kinks and doesn't hold that really nice rounded shape that it does when it's got the like stuffing inside. And then for most of the tutorial, you'll be watching me using this denim. It's a medium weight and it is just like a regular denim with quite a lot of texture on the surface. Although I did manage to flip this right sides out, it was so tricky to turn, so I wouldn't recommend using it. The reason I chose this is because it does have a very clear like right and wrong side, and I wanted that to be clear for the tutorial. But I would really go for lightweight, smooth fabrics. Like the next version I want to do is in a quilting cotton, and I'm certain it'll work out. And these are in like a nylon taffeta. You could experiment with making the actual strap part wider, because I basically just couldn't get the stuffing through. No matter what I did, it was just catching. But what you'll see once we're drafting the pattern, that you can make it wider. And a last note before we get into the materials, this is my upcoming pattern, the Talia Tote. This is going to be the smallest version, and I'm just working on developing the medium and hopefully large, if I can get the structure right, version of this pattern. So watch this space. Once this pattern is developed and ready to go, I will update the caption and you'll be able to go and buy one from Etsy. We already discussed the fabric, but just make sure that it's lightweight and you should be absolutely fine. The piping that I used is from the hardware store, and it's what we'll be using to stuff the handle and make sure it doesn't kink once it's finished. I found some options online. I have linked them below, but just know that I haven't ordered any of them, so I don't know for sure if it's the exact same. This is the one that I bought from Home Depot in my local store. Bag foam is what we use to make it nice and puffy as like the interfacing stabilizer. I use Pellon Flex Foam. Pellon Flex Foam is the thickest of the foams that I've tried, and it's my favorite, honestly. It just makes everything so puffy, and like if you're quilting with it, you can see how nice the quilting lines are. But you can use other bag foams or maybe even some quilt batting or something like that, but just be aware that if it's much thinner, then the bag might the handle might look like a bit loose, and it might wrinkle up a bit much. So you might have to experiment with the pattern and just very slightly narrowing that or getting wider stuffing. And then you will need double-sided tape. As always, my favorite is Hyperstick from Wowwork. It's just so sticky and it never fails me, but you can use anything you like. If you can't get hold of this, it's okay. It just holds the strap in the exact right place when you're ready to attach it to the bag. And then tweezers or some sort of device for helping you to turn the handle. I have these long tweezers that I think I got in like a rhinestone set one time, and you'll see I do use them to help turn the handle the right side out. You could probably get it done without, but you will probably spend a lot more time turning it. And then the last thing, it's not essential but very useful, is like small scissors for trimming the handle down, because we're going to be trimming close to the corners and getting in between the layers to trim the foam and the fabric to different widths. So those I find are really helpful. So we're going to be building the handle pattern up in blocks, and then once that's done, we can smooth out the lines and then add in our seam allowance. First, you need to decide how long to make your handle so that it fits over your shoulder. I would recommend using a bag that you have, or attaching a tape measure to the pattern piece of the bag you would like to create. I'm going to make mine 29 inches. And the reason I'm making mine 29 inches is because these are 27 inches and I just feel like the bag is slightly too high in my armpit and I'd like it there to be a little more room. So if you're planning to do like a small bag like this, then 29 inches is probably a good length. Start by drawing a guideline that is the exact length of your handle. So my line is going to be 29 inches total. Then the ends that attach to the bag are made up of 2" by 1" blocks. This will give a nice and narrow attachment that we spoke about. As we add each section to the pattern piece, make sure it's centered over the guideline. That means that the end blocks will extend 1/2 inch above and 1/2 inch below the guideline to give a total width of 1 inch. Once both of your end blocks have been added, you can add the central block that will make up the main body of the handle. This section is 2 inches wide, and so it will extend 1 inch above and 1 inch below the guideline. Fill the whole space in between those two end bits with that central block. And now we just need to taper between those two widths to give a smooth transition. So draw a line 1 inch in from the end of your wider section and do that on both sides. And now connect the end of that line with the end of the narrower section to give a diagonal line. Now we need to curve out the edges. So I just freehand mine, but you can feel free to draw around something circular that you have. And next we're going to add the seam allowance. I am adding 3/8 of an inch, and I would urge you to also add 3/8 of an inch, even if you have a different preferred seam allowance. I wouldn't want to use more because then you'll be using excess bag foam and it's very expensive. And I wouldn't want to add less because the hole we're going to leave to turn our handle out of, we need to fold the seam allowance in neatly over that and stitch it down. So if you don't leave enough, it's going to be really tricky to sort of like fold that away. And then the final step is to add a notch that we're going to cut only out of the foam. So to do that, find the midpoint of your handle, and from that point mark out 1.5 inches on either side, and we're just going to put a little line within the seam allowance. And we're going to cut this rectangle away when we cut the foam. And by the way, if you are fighting with your paper, just iron it. Just iron it on low heat. Do be careful of the tape. I would recommend being on at least the lower setting, the nylon setting. But yeah, this was giving me a lot of trouble and I should have ironed it earlier. So this is what the foam is going to look like with a notch out of it where we're going to leave a gap to turn the handle. And you need 1 foam piece and then 2 fabric pieces for each handle. So if you're going to do 2 handles on the bag, you need 4 fabric pieces and 2 foam pieces. And then this is the right side of the denim, the dark side, and this is the wrong side of the denim, the light side, just to remind you. And I forgot to say, you can cut the pieces on the grain line or the cross grain, and I just used like the center line that we drew down the middle of the strap as the grain line, and that just means that you can cut the pattern piece along the like factory finished edge or like at a right angle on the cut edge. Just be aware that if you cut it on the bias or like on any sort of diagonal, then the fibers can like warp and stretch out of shape. Before we get into sewing, let's make sure that we've stacked the layers in the correct order. Take one of your fabric pieces and place it right side facing up. Now take your second fabric piece and lay it right sides facing down on top of that. Now you can take the foam piece and lay it on top of both of the fabric layers and add clips around the edge so nothing shifts. We're going to sew all the way around the edge using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at one side of the gap in the foam and ending at the other side. Make sure you backstitch a few times at the beginning and end of this seam, because when we flip the handle right sides out, we will be putting a lot of tension on the edges of the stitching. And I like to sew the fabric layers facing down towards the feed dogs. I find it makes everything feed through evenly. Once you finish sewing, we're ready to trim down our seam allowance, and I'm going to trim mine down to a scant 1/4 inch all the way around, trimming through the layers of fabric and foam. Make sure you don't trim away any of the fabric around the gap though, because we want all of that seam allowance to help us fold it away and look really neat at the next step. Now we need to focus a little on the ends. We don't want to trim away any extra fabric because this will make it weak around the corners, and sometimes you can get frayed fabric poking out between the stitches and it just looks terrible. Carefully trim away just the foam layer as close as you can to the stitching at the corners. This is going to allow really nice crisp corners on the finished handle. Next comes the fun and slightly fiddly part, turning the handle. I like to start by inverting the ends with my hands first, and this bit can be really tricky, so take your time. I found that using the long tweezers is really helpful. You can sort of push them into the side that has the foam so that you can pull without damaging the fabric, because the tension is mainly going on the foam. But I would just play around with your fabric, and if you're using a very delicate fabric, I would recommend skipping the tweezers because it could cause a pull or some fraying, and then it would end up ruining your handle. Now roll the seams between your fingers, and when you get to the gap, fold the seam allowances inward and clip in place. The smooth side is the right side of your handle, and the side with the ridge is going to be the wrong side. Now we're ready to top stitch the edges. Go all the way around at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I know it seems counterintuitive, but I like to sew with the right side facing down. That allows me to gently pull on the fabric to roll the seam allowances towards the wrong side as I sew. Now, to make this handle look like a tube, we need to stitch the sides together. Using a chalk marker, draw a line 3.5 inches from both ends. Using these lines as a guide, fold the long edges together, wrong sides facing. Stitch between the marked lines, following your previous top stitching for a clean finish. And now we're ready to stuff the handle. Cut your piping to the length of the enclosed section. I just hold mine up against it and cut the right length off, and you should be able to just feed it through. As you can see, I am having a lot of trouble at this step due to the thickness and rough texture of the fabric. So I actually filmed stuffing another one. I made a whole nother handle, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like getting that through and how much easier it is with a thin, smooth fabric. So you've finished your handle, and now we're ready to attach it to the bag. I hear you saying, I cannot possibly get a pin through all of those layers. Well, we're going to use double-sided seam tape. First, you need to mark your stitching line on both sides of the handle. This should be 2 inches from the bottom end, and I'm going to mark mine on the right side and the wrong side, and it's going to give me a guide for where to place my tape so I don't sew through it and get a sticky, gunky needle. Now we're ready to take some double-sided tape and attach it to the wrong side of the handle. And then finally you need to mark the handle placement line on your bag, and you can peel off your tape and stick your handles in place. I like to leave the double-sided tape on one side of the handle and just stick one side at a time. Now we're going to stitch around the edge of the rectangle using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I actually went in and did an X inside of this box, and I went over one of my lines again so that I could get the X without lifting the needle or back stitching. I really like the way it looks on this. I didn't do it on my original bag, but I feel like it also makes the handle much more secure. But if you don't like that look, you don't have to do that. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I would love it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you do use this tutorial, feel free to tag me over on Instagram. I would love to see your creations. I'll see you in the next one.